Radical Radio Collective.
Good afternoon, you're tuned in to 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. This is Eco Radio, Australia's longest running peace and environment show, taking over your middle of the day, middle of the week,
end of the month
yeah. Airwaves.
It's an exciting time for all of the spooky fellas out there.
Yeah.
All the people who enjoy the spooky stuff.
Yeah, the spooky season, and I'm not just talking about tax time.
Oh.
It's you're listening to Eco Radio. My name's Dave.
My name is Zack. I use he, they pronouns.
I use he, him pronouns. I want to start off by acknowledging and paying my respects to the custodians on the country in which we broadcast. We're located in the city Mangin on Turrbal, Yuggera land. I also want to acknowledge and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are listening in today. Our radio waves reach Cubby Cubby and Jinabara country in the north, Waka Waka country in the west. In the east, we pay our respects to the Quandamooka people, and down south, we reach the Commonwealth, Nagaragwal, Mununjali, Wanjerabara, and Yugambeh countries. Today on the show, because it is the spooky season, we are going to be talking spooky things. We're going to be talking about the Australian Cryptids.
Yeah, they're fun.
Yeah, that's spooky. We'll talk to Maurice Quirk, an academic that has written about the bunyip and other cryptids. And later in the show, we're going to enter the forests, and we'll talk to an organiser for the Rally for Native Forests who's going to be coming into the studio. To start things off, though, Zack, can you tell me what is a cryptid?
So I think there needs to be like some kind of distinction between like cryptid and like folklore and mythology, right? Cryptid to me is at least since like they're things that people claim to have seen in like the modern era that people they claim to see it in the modern era, and they like out in the bush they like, whoa, there's this large hairy man that is unexplained or whatnot. So in my mind, that's more of like what a cryptid is, rather than things that have potentially come from indigenous mythology per se.
Yeah, dreaming stories.
So I think that distinction is important to make there. In saying that, there's not a whole lot of interesting cryptids in Australia, I want to say.
Well, we've got the two most well-known,
the Yowie and the Bunyip.
And the Yowie, yeah.
But a lot of cryptids are like based on extinct megafauna. So things like, we saw this giant 12-foot bird walking around in the outback, but that was something that indigenous people would have actually seen when they came to Australia, right? Or the same with things like giant wombats. There were giant wombats. There were lions at one point, or like things similar to lions in Australia at one point. And there were like giant lizards, like the megalania. So those are kind of like ideas that have been passed down from indigenous peoples through the through their generations, and kind of like were spoken of to white people, I imagine, and then they've started seeing them around, sort of thing. So a lot of like cryptids are based on that extinct megafauna, but there is another interesting one called the Burrinjaw, and the Burrinjaw is a theropod dinosaur looking thing. So
hang on, what's a theropod?
So it's like T-Rex dinosaurs, so like that raptor kind of thing. Two-legged, eats meat, that sort of thing. And the interesting thing about that is that it may I wanted to bring this up, it may appear in some indigenous people's stories, but it's a dinosaur, which is very, very interesting to me. I always find it fascinating when like you get like ideas that are potentially very separated, but they kind of like conjoin somewhere, you know.
What is the story of it? Where does it come from?
So it's like out west in like central Australia sort of thing. Western Queensland, all those are very sparse places, I guess. But yeah, so other than that, we've got the Yowie as well, which is, as people probably know, it's like akin to Australia's Bigfoot sort of thing, right?
And now made of chocolate.
And are made of chocolate. And they were also in something else. I think they were featured in a Scooby-Doo movie at one point.
Yeah, right.
And so 50% of Yowie sightings come from Queensland, so they're very...
Is that right?
Yeah, at least according to the Yowie sighting Yowie reporting page that appears sometimes. A fun fact is that former Queensland Senator Bill O'Chee said that he saw a Yowie in Springbrook on a school trip.
Okay.
And there's a couple places around, like Kilcoy, which is inland from the Sunshine Coast, has a couple of features of Yowie, like pieces. So there's like a statue in the park. There's a thing where you can go and stick your head where the Yowie like thing is, and a cardboard cutout kind of thing, and you're like, oh wow, I'm a Yowie now. Okay. But yeah, that Kilcoy was also like known to have had a couple of Yowies out there, and then places like Gympie seen there pretty regularly too, allegedly.
Okay.
But they have quite like a wide distribution. They are found throughout most of Australia as well, or at least have been sighted in parts of Australia. Then we've got the bunyip, obviously. Mm-hmm. The bunyip is an interesting case because no one really has a specific description of what it looks like. It's very, very varied with like its physical appearance.
It's amalgamation of various like different sightings. They're all just like, oh, I saw this thing that had a tail. That's a bunyip. Yeah. Oh, I saw this thing that was up on two legs, and that's a bunyip.
Oh, this thing, it was like it had the head of a really big cat, and that was a bunyip, and it was in the water. So,
okay.
Yeah. So
is it always around water?
Yes, I believe so at least. So, as I'm sure we'll talk about with our guests on later, just kind of like some of where the bunyip like originates from, and kind of like the stories that, or like why it may like exist, if that makes sense, because it's a lot easier to like describe there's a giant monster in the Billabong nearby rather than to keep like kids away, for example, rather than say, oh, don't go to the Billabong, you're going to drown. It's just like a safety story in some capacity, I imagine. But again, that was another creature from indigenous people's mythology that's been like co-opted by white people who have claimed they have seen it when they probably have not. But maybe a bit of a less well-known one is the Hook Island sea monster.
Yeah, so tell me about this.
So up around Hook Island, which is in the Whitsundays, there was a French photographer called Robert Le Sirec, who went on a holiday around Hook Island in 1964, and he photographed a 25-metre sea monster in shallow water, and you can actually go online and see these photos that he uploaded. It's very sea serpent-esque, tadpole-like, and it was kind of just like resting in a lagoon for the duration of the time that he was able to photograph it from his boat. It was about 60 centimetres thick as well, and yeah, it was just kind of sitting there in that shallow lagoon.
Just chilling.
Yeah, and eventually it just swam off.
So why does it get called a sea monster if it's just relaxing?
It's kind of like serpentine, you know, like very sea monster-esque.
No need to be afraid of it, though.
Yeah. It didn't go up and attack him or anything. I don't know, maybe it's being a bit melodramatic with it.
Yeah.
But eventually it just like swam off. And if you look at the photos, they're not the most convincing of anything. It is very like serpentine though, and kind of like an explanation. It's just been like a long bit of plastic, an incredibly long bit of plastic,
okay.
and that managed to maintain like a serpentine structural shape throughout the whole time.
Yeah.
So it's probably nothing other than that, because there hasn't been any sightings since, even when the Hook Island. Yeah. Like the Whitsundays have become more and more populated with people.
And the Hook Island sea monster has moved on.
Yeah, maybe it's the deep Pacific sea monster now.
Yeah.
I don't know, yeah.
They tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed.
You're listening to Eco Radio, the radio of the future. The future.
4ZZ's Radio Reversal has gone digital. Since 2012, the collective have been building a record of radio theorising, organising, mistake-making, rethinking, and community building that happens across this city. So, if 1 hour a week isn't enough for you, head to radioreversal.substack.com to learn more about the Radio Reversal podcast. or listen to the full episodes via your favourite podcasting app.
This is Eco Radio, and on the line now we have Maurice Quirk, a academic that has written about the bunyip and other cryptids. Maurice, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, our pleasure. Can you explain to us the existence of the bunyip in Aboriginal cosmology as a spirit being?
Yeah, absolutely. So the word bunyip is originally derived from a Wemba word, which is banib. And the banib refers to a very specific water spirit from kind of Wemba mythology. And the important thing to understand about a lot of these dreaming stories that things like the bunyip and the Yowie are based on is that they're generally, as you said earlier in the show, an amalgamation of a few different concepts, because obviously Aboriginal Australian mythologies differ a lot between different nations, different regions, and so it's important to understand that when we talk about something like the bunyip, that's actually a combination of a lot of different Indigenous concepts from a given region and kind of turned into a single concept. So, for example, the bunyip, as I said, borrows a lot from the banib, from the Wemba, but it also borrows a lot from, for example, the Malyawonk from the Ngarrindjeri people, kind of in a similar region. And the way that kind of happened was obviously before the European invasion of the continent, all these stories existed at the same time. And then when Europeans came, they kind of spoke to Indigenous people from these regions and assumed that all of these stories about, kind of similar stories about water spirits were all referring to one single creature that actually existed.
Right.
Because obviously when Europeans got here, there were a lot of animals and flora that they'd never seen before and they couldn't have ever imagined. So when they heard these stories about things like water spirits from Indigenous people, they assumed they were just another kind of animal that they'd never seen before and that must exist on this strange continent.
Yeah. Well, a lot of your research talks about how the bunyip lives in waterholes, is a water spirit.
Yes.
It snatches children,
Yes.
and I guess this is a way to make children like behave around water, or so they don't go off into the water by themselves. But the research I was reading talked about bunyips, story spirit beings from subtropical areas and south from there.
Yes.
Do you know if there are bunyip stories from up north where the threat of crocodiles is a very real threat to people around waterholes?
Yes, certainly. So, yeah, basically, there's a lot of different dreaming water spirits that exist across different nations, and yeah, the similarities between the threat of the bunyip and the threat of the crocodile is definitely very real. And so it is kind of interesting to see those stories emerge in places that also have the very real threat of the crocodile. And it kind of goes to show the fact that, like, the dreaming in a lot of Indigenous contexts is kind of this metaphysical, spiritual thing that isn't literal to the real world, but it is still does have reflections in the material world. So the kind of the bunyip exists alongside the crocodile, but it's also a more distinct spiritual being than the crocodile. So it's interesting to see how a lot of cultures discuss animals that very clearly do exist in addition to these more metaphysical concepts.
Yeah, there's a story by Nunaka woman, Quandamuka woman, Udaguru Nunaka, about a bunyip and how it was it had broken a taboo and then became a vengeful, I guess, spirit.
Yes. I know exactly the story you're talking about, and that particular story, I believe, or at least a variation of it, because obviously there's a lot of variations of similar concepts because it's an oral history. There's no one specific concrete version. It's the idea that the bunyip originally was a man from a particular Indigenous community who had broken the taboo, like you said, and his kind of spiritual punishment was becoming this bunyip who then existed just outside of this community and was kind of perceived as a threat to them for all time.
Yeah, so how has invasion changed these stories?
Well, I mean, a lot of the discussion around Australian cryptids and even kind of referring to these things as cryptids is really defined by invasion and how Europeans have interpreted, like I said, dreaming stories, and also the way that invasion has affected the natural environment. So, as we've discussed, a lot of the versions of these creatures that kind of emerged following invasion were informed by the assumption that, well, this continent has so many of these strange new animals anyway, all of these things could possibly be real, and that informed a lot of how these things went from dreaming to a more European style of folklore. That, often, in addition to the genocide of the Indigenous people and kind of cultural imperialism, often took over from a lot of these things. Not that the Indigenous versions don't continue to exist. And an interesting thing that's kind of emerged in the last few decades is the way, not just in Australia but globally, that cryptids and this idea of these undiscovered animals reflects a lot of the anxieties about how humans, especially in European colonialism, have had a really devastating effect on the natural environment, and that's certainly clear in Australia. The spread of climate change and kind of the mass extinction events really has made us reflect on, like, okay, there actually aren't that many animals to discover that, because we've killed a lot of them. And it's interesting seeing things like the re-emergence of the popularity of things like the Tasmanian tiger, and the idea that it is this species that Europeans drove to extinction, and now it's kind of classified as a cryptid because there is hope that, oh, maybe we didn't actually ruin everything. Maybe there are some that still exist somewhere. So it is certainly the way cryptids exist in Australia post-invasion really reflects a lot of the attitudes and anxieties towards that kind of displacement of Indigenous culture and Indigenous people, as well as reflecting on the ways that invasion has kind of devastated the natural world in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's really interesting, the relationship between, I guess, this popularity of cryptids when we've got a huge rate of extinction of animals that we do know about.
Yeah, certainly.
That includes the Queensland tiger, which is an idea that there's a thylacine living in Queensland as well.
Yes, absolutely.
But we've seen the extinction of the northern hairy-nosed wombat. That's down to 350 animals. So how do these sort of relate in the way that climate change is pushing extinction rates?
I think that, as we said, Australia in particular, it's so biodiverse, but also we're also especially bad at protecting that biodiversity, and extinction is a big issue that we're facing at the moment. And I think kind of the rising interest in cryptids does reflect a kind of last hope for optimism in the face of this climate reality of maybe we haven't messed up as much. Maybe there's all these species we need to discover, and there's this abundance that we just don't know about, instead of actually facing the reality of what we've been doing to the environment for the last few centuries. I think that cryptozoology both drives a lot of attention to these issues of climate and of species and extinction, but I think it can also kind of give people a false optimism and a reason to not worry about it as much as they should, perhaps.
That's really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can see why you research it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting.
Through your research, have you found any really interesting cryptids that, a lot further out of the ordinary than the European-style cryptid of a big humanoid swamp creature?
A lot of the ones that I find really interesting at the moment are ones that are actually purported to be around Antarctica. Antarctica is a really interesting topic for kind of cryptids and folklore because unlike Australia or America or similar places, there's not kind of an indigenous culture or cultures that's been displaced. It's a lot because it's kind of a research hub on an international scale. There's a lot of different cultures contributing. And so I think a lot of the kind of folklore and the cryptids that emerge from around there are really interesting because they are really modern or postmodern cryptids.
Do you have any examples?
I can't. Sorry. There's obviously you see reflections of a lot of the very common sea monster myths, which are really popular on a global level. And because it's a very biodiverse region in a way that's not seen. Well, not biodiverse, but a very specific extreme environment that fosters a very particular type of biology. And so you have a lot of speculation about what could possibly exist in such an extreme environment. And there's a few examples that are entirely constructed. They kind of started on Reddit and are kind of like not a cryptid as we know it. It's kind of, here's an idea of something that could exist. But then you also have those genuine eyewitness accounts of things in the Antarctic waters and stuff like that that are still kind of developing as myths, and we're really seeing the early versions of them at the moment.
Yeah, right. Okay. That's going to be an interesting avenue in the future.
Yeah, it's something I'm really interested to see develop in the next couple of years.
So I'm kind of like interested in when bringing up like Reddit and YouTube, for example, and like the cryptozoology spheres on there, particularly in regards to like Australian cryptids, they consider like indigenous mythology and folklore creatures or spirits from those indigenous mythology and folklores as like cryptids. Do you think there should be like a distinction in place between like cryptids and that indigenous mythology and folklore?
I think it really is a difficult line to draw. And actually my PhD thesis was on this exact issue in North America about the classification of cryptids and how much those stories are informed by indigenous concepts and what is lost in interpreting indigenous concepts in this really European colonial way, and kind of what we can understand about colonialism from the idea of cryptozoology and the need to classify kind of non-European spirit beings in this really biological way and kind of be really rational about it in a way that is not actually that applicable to a lot of indigenous worldviews and the way these things developed naturally. So I think this is always kind of, ever since cryptozoology kind of emerged in the mid-20th century, this has been a big issue because it is a really colonial pursuit inherently. And so I think looking at cryptozoology as a movement and as a classification can itself teach us a lot about colonial attitudes towards indigenous knowledge and indigenous spirituality and the way that kind of that Western mindset approaches things like the natural world.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks very much for talking to us, Maurice.
No, that's all good. Thanks again for having me on.
And how can people find out some more about your research?
I am on Twitter at Redacted Quirk. You can follow me. I am working on some things at the moment, some more research coming out. There's a big kind of cryptozoology movement going on the internet, a real renaissance. So I'm doing a lot of stuff on that, and I hope to have some more work out soon.
That's fantastic.
They tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed.
You're listening to Eco Radio, the radio of the future. The future, the future.
For your dose of news, current affairs, and analysis, tune in to 4ZZZ 102.1 FM, 12 to 1 p.m. daily. Only Human, Eco Radio, Paradigm Shift, Megahertz, and Brisbane Line, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday. 4ZZZ 102.1 FM, people-powered radio.
You're listening to 4ZZZ.
You're listening to Eco Radio on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. Everything's connected.
And we're back. We have been talking about cryptids, and one of the places that people see cryptids a lot is in a forest, specifically native forests. And we've got with us Louis, who is here to tell us about the nationwide rallies for native forests with the Bob Brown Foundation. Louis, thanks very much for coming into the studio.
Thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Rally for Native Forests, what are the threats to native forests that we're rallying against?
There's a few, and it's quite different state to state. If we can talk about Tasmania as an example, and that's where the Bob Brown Foundation is based, there are general logging occurring all across the state, but then looking at a place like Takaina or the Tarkine, a lot of it is mining interests, so expansions of mines, even just wanting to do a tailings dam from a mine. So it's, there's many threats.
Yeah, right. What are those mines for, do you know?
Yeah, so one that we're focusing on quite heavily at the moment is Tasmania's oldest running mine, and recently sold to the Chinese state, so it's no longer owned and operated by Tasmanians. But they are starting to run out of space in their first original tailings dam, and they're, instead of doing what many other mines around the world, which is the more environmentally friendly option, is rather than, it's called paste filling, so putting it back into the area of which they've just mined. Instead, they want to build a pipe across the Pieman River, I believe, and turn a beautiful, beautiful valley of untouched Takaina, cool temperate rainforest into a new tailings dam. So
really?
Just a toxic sludge, something like 25 metres squared.
Wow.
And purely because it's cheaper. It's cheaper to do that than to paste fill.
Far out.
Yeah.
And they've got approval to do this, or like what? How far along is this destruction happening?
We are waiting. So the Federal Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek, has the final say, and we are waiting. It's on her desk, and we're waiting. What we've just seen with her also making the final decision for removing salmon farms from Macquarie Harbour, where we now realise are like 140 Morgian skates, which have been around since dinosaur time. She has just announced she won't be making a decision until after the next federal election. So it's for 140 Morgian skates, that's not looking great because the federal election might not be till May.
You'll have to forgive me though. What's a Morgian skate?
They're so cool. They're the skates are, I think they're a fish, but they kind of look like a stingray.
They're in the same group as like stingray, sharks, sawfish.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they're cartilaginous, but they don't have like the barb like a stingray does.
Yeah.
And these are freshwater? These are in the Derwent River.
The Macquarie Harbour.
The Macquarie Harbour.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's their last habitat that we know of, and it would be sad to see them go, considering they've been here a lot longer than us.
Yeah.
Same as the forests.
Yeah, and this is actually sawfish sighting season.
Yeah, up in
at the moment.
Yeah, up in the northern part of Australia.
Wow.
Yeah, so just a bit of a coincidence there. How does the rally for native forests, how is that helping?
So the native forest rallies we've been trying to do them every roughly 6 months, and it's a great way to maintain the pressure on the government that this should be at the forefront of being a part of the environmental policy. So it's looking like we have time for one more, even before the federal election.
Okay.
And it's just to keep it on the table, and to, I think over 10,000 people, when we combine all the rallies we've had in the last 18 months, over 10,000 people have joined. And then you look at over nearly 60,000 people have signed our Native Forest Declaration. And I know the MP Sophie Scamps in New South Wales has launched her own ban, end of native forest logging, and that got 15,000 signatures in the first weekend. So when you combine all of these things, we're just trying to keep native forests on the table, on the discussion table.
Yeah. So there is the argument that logging is a sustainable building practice or a building material. And I guess the idea that the native forest is a more harmonious with the wildlife, so still produces homes for wildlife than, say, a pine forest that we have in our state's forests. Is there a balance between native forests and for wildlife and native forests for logging, or they're totally incompatible?
They are mostly incompatible, particularly a number of our most favourite marsupials, birds, need a certain age tree to even nest in, and often that tree might not even flower, which is their favourite food, or there are animals in plantation forests, but it's not conducive to a healthy, biodiverse habitat.
Yeah, pine trees aren't getting big hollows big enough for greater gliders.
Exactly, yeah. And the greater glider has just one marsupial of the year, and we have a greater glider habitat here in Queensland, and it is scary how little habitat they have left.
Yes.
Yeah, so we actually have a great speaker on Sunday who might teach us a bit more about that, which is exciting, because I think before even they won that competition, a lot of people haven't seen a greater glider in person, definitely, but even like images. So yeah, they're so cool.
Yes, yeah, they are. And I think you're right that they're a underappreciated animal, or for some people, like unknown. I've definitely never seen one in person, but I've seen a lot of pictures and they're very cute. Yeah. So can you tell me about the speakers happening at the Rally for Native Forests?
Yeah, we have a pretty excellent lineup, if I may say so myself. We have Senator Larissa Waters joining us, which will be lovely considering how our most recent state election has just gone. And we have Nikki Moffat from the Queensland Conservation Council, who specialises in protected areas and hopefully expanding protected areas. We have Spencer Hitchin from Save Sunrise Glossies. He's a 13-year-old activist, passionate environmentalist, photographer, and he knows quite a lot about what's been going up Sunshine Coast Way and in the hinterland there. Who else have we got? Uncle Adrian Barragubba as well, who people might know from all the stuff happening with the Adani mine up in Carmichael.
Yeah, he's the patriarch of Wangan Jangalingu conservation.
Yeah. Who else do we have?
You have Max from Save Dongwa State Forest.
Yes, Max. So he's the community representative from the action group out there who it's about 111 kilometres west of Brisbane, greater glider habitat, very much towing that line of about to be logged and just destroying that community. So I'm really excited to hear from him because I've never been out there. I'm just aware of how beautiful it is. So that will be really special as well.
Yeah, and we just got a text in, someone showing their support, saying, I love native forest rallies. It's so wonderful to be in a group of people passionate about the same things, getting loud, something so important, native forests forever. So that's a big endorsement there. And you're also going to be have Sunny Lou, who is a Brisbane magazine artist.
Paradigm Shift's podcast is available online and via your favourite podcasting app, challenging the assumptions of our current society to investigate alternative ways of living for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Tune in to the Paradigm Shift podcast. Just search The Paradigm Shift for Triple Z.
And we're back, still in the studio with Louis from the Bob Brown Foundation, ready to rally for native forests. And there's a thing that we do every week, Louis, where we round up all of the local environment events and peace events. And so do you want to find out if the Rally for Native Forests made it onto the Bush Care Roundup?
I'd love to.
Okay.
It's a Bush Care Roundup. They've been pulling out weeds and then they put in trees. It's the Bush Care Roundup.
All right, so happening on Thursday, starting at 7:30 going to 9:30, we have the Loder Creek Bush Care Working Bee. That's happening at the corner of Grace Street and Armitage Street in Loder.
On Friday from 7 till 10 p.m, we have the Springfield Lakes Nature Care Cane Toad Catching Night at 50 Burlington Terrace, Springfield Lakes. And then on Saturday from 9 till midday, we have the Skipper Identification Workshop with Cliff Mayer, and that one is CWCN Centre 47 Hepworth Street, Chapel Hill. From 1:45 till 6, we have the Ipswich Climate Action Group Trashian Parade, and that is at 82 Nicholas Street, Ipswich. And then from 6 till 9 p.m, we have the Light Palestinian documentary screening at House Conspiracy, 42 Molson Street, West End.
And then on Sunday, a big day, Sunday is, at 8 o'clock, starting off early, we've got the Crosby Road Bush Care Working Bee. That's at Crosby Road at Bushview Stop 21, Ascot. At 9 o'clock, we have the Thika Butterfly Bush Care Working Bee. That's Sir Samuel Griffith Drive, Mount Cootha. And then at 10 o'clock, Louis, we have the Bob Brown Foundation Rally for Native Forests. That's happening at 68 Hill and Terrace, West End. So what are other things that people can expect at the rally?
So thanks for including us in your Bush Care Roundup. Who we just heard, Sunny Lou, she'll be opening the rally as well, so we'll have a bit of live music. We've got some beautiful merch for sale, and yeah, that fantastic lineup of speakers.
Yeah.
So it's going to be an hour of power.
Yeah, well, Spencer texted in, said that they can't wait for the rally for native forests, and that they hope lots of people will come and protect our amazing forests.
Awesome.
And that'll be our show for today. That's Eco Radio. We can listen back on 4zzz.org.au, or we've just started the Eco Radio podcast.
We have.
So you can find that on all good podcasting apps.